The energy signature materialized slowly aboard the human vessel Prometheus, taking shape as Ambassador Crixtal of the Ethereal Collective adjusted his translucent form. First contact protocols demanded perfection. This was humanity's first official meeting with an advanced galactic civilization, and both species had spent months preparing through careful diplomatic channels. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood waiting in the sterile white conference room, her uniform crisp and professional, dark hair pulled back in military regulation. Behind her, Dr. Marcus Webb fidgeted with his tablet, the xenobiologist barely containing his excitement, while Commander James Park maintained the rigid posture of someone accustomed to potential threats. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador," Captain Rodriguez said, extending her hand in the greeting ritual they transmitted weeks earlier. Crixtal studied the gesture. Such an odd custom, voluntarily touching another being. His species had evolved beyond physical contact 47,000 years ago, communicating through harmonic resonances and energy patterns. Still, diplomacy required adaptation. He solidified part of his ethereal form and briefly clasped her palm. The contact sent unexpected data through his sensors. Her pulse was elevated. Nervousness? Excitement? The biological readings fascinated him. "The honor is mine, Captain Rodriguez. The collective has observed humanity's development with considerable interest." Dr. Webb practically bounced forward. "Ambassador, we're absolutely fascinated by your people's transcendence beyond physical form. The energy conversion alone must have required incredible technological advancement. How did your species achieve such evolution?" "Approximately 47,000 Earth years ago," Crixtal replied, noting the humans' infectious enthusiasm. "We shed our crude biological limitations and became beings of pure energy and consciousness. Physical form became unnecessary." Commander Park nodded respectfully but said nothing, his eyes constantly moving, scanning exits, monitoring the ambassador's energy patterns, calculating threat assessments. A warrior's instincts, Crixtal realized, even in diplomacy. "Your technological capabilities are remarkable," Captain Rodriguez continued. "Our deep space monitors detected your ships crossing entire star systems in hours. That level of faster-than-light travel is beyond our current understanding. Elementary physics when one transcends matter's constraints," Crixtal responded. "But I confess curiosity about humanity's motivations. What compels your species to venture so far from your homeworld? Most civilizations at your technological level remain planetary-focused for centuries longer." A micro-expression passed between Dr. Webb and Captain Rodriguez, so brief that only Crixtal's advanced sensors caught it. That silent communication intrigued him more than their words. "Curiosity, mainly," Dr. Webb said, but his biometric readings suggested incomplete truth. "We've always wondered what else exists out there. The drive to explore," Captain Rodriguez added. "It's fundamental to who we are as a species." Their answers seemed oddly abstract. In Crixtal's extensive experience, species pursued space travel for concrete reasons: resources, territory, survival necessity. But humans spoke of exploration as if it were an emotional requirement rather than logical progression. "Perhaps you could show me your vessel's systems?" Crixtal suggested. "I'm curious how your species has adapted to deep space travel despite biological limitations." During the tour, Crixtal's sensors worked overtime. The human technology was surprisingly sophisticated for such a young civilization, but their behavior patterns were even more intriguing. Every crew member moved with focused intensity, attacking routine tasks with an energy that seemed almost predatory. But predatory toward what? They weren't hunting for survival anymore. "Ambassador," Dr. Webb said as they passed through the observation deck, "you mentioned that most species develop more slowly. How many spacefaring civilizations has the collective encountered?" "Thousands," Crixtal replied. "The pattern is remarkably consistent across different species: atmospheric flight, orbital mechanics, interplanetary exploration, then interstellar capability. Timeframes vary, but the sequence remains predictable." "What's the typical time frame?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "From first flight to interstellar travel?" Crixtal calculated quickly. For species comparable to your current development, 15 to 20,000 years is standard. Silence fell over the humans. Commander Park's hand unconsciously drifted toward his sidearm. A stress response Crixtal was beginning to recognize. How long did it take humanity? Crixtal asked, though growing dread suggested he wouldn't like the answer. 66 years, Dr. Webb said quietly. From Kitty Hawk to faster-than-light capability in 66 years. Crixtal's energy form flickered violently. Impossible. No species in galactic history had developed that rapidly. Their historical data had to be incorrect. Perhaps we should continue this discussion over your evening meal, he managed, desperately needing time to process this impossibility. As they walked toward the dining facilities, Crixtal's consciousness churned with implications he didn't want to consider. He had just discovered something unprecedented about humanity. Something that violated every model of species development the collective had established over millennia. And every instinct he possessed was screaming that he should be terrified. The human dining facility defied everything Crixtal understood about biological sustenance. Across 47,000 years of observing countless species, he had witnessed eating as a simple, efficient process, converting raw materials into biological fuel with minimal ceremony. Humans transformed consumption into something incomprehensible. Captain Rodriguez had insisted he observe their dinner ritual, claiming that shared meals represented crucial human social bonding. Crixtal materialized near the central table, his energy form flickering with confusion as he watched the crew engage in behaviors that served no logical purpose. "Marcus, you have to try this," Commander Park said, sliding a steaming plate across the table. Chef Martinez somehow synthesized something resembling Bangkok street curry using our basic protein reserves. Dr. Webb accepted the offering and took a careful bite. His entire physiological response transformed instantly. Pupils dilating, facial muscles relaxing, an involuntary sound of satisfaction vibrating through his throat. Outstanding. The capsaicin levels are perfectly calibrated. How did you manage the complexity with limited ingredients? Chef Martinez, a sturdy woman with traces of synthesized flour still coating her hands, beamed with unmistakable pride. Trade secret document, but I've been experimenting with flavor memory algorithms. Food is nutrients, Crixtal interjected, genuinely perplexed. You have successfully converted basic proteins and carbohydrates into required biological fuel. Why does the specific molecular arrangement of taste compounds matter beyond caloric content? The table fell into that peculiar silence again, the same pattern of unspoken communication he'd observed during their first meeting. These micro-exchanges fascinated and disturbed him. It's never just fuel for us, Ambassador, Captain Rodriguez explained patiently. Food carries memory, culture, emotional resonance. That curry connects Commander Park to his childhood in Thailand. It provides psychological comfort alongside physical sustenance. Your emotional states fluctuate based on chemical flavor combinations? Crixtal's sensors registered elevated neurotransmitter activity throughout the dining area, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins cascading through human nervous systems triggered by simple taste experiences. Everything influences our emotional states, Dr. Webb chuckled, gesturing broadly. That's the fundamental point of being human. Chef Martinez approached their table, wiping her hands on her apron. How's dinner treating everyone? Ambassador, I wish I could prepare something special for your species, but I'm honestly not sure how to cook electromagnetic radiation. Your consideration is appreciated but unnecessary, Crixtal replied automatically. I absorb ambient energy frequencies. The process requires no preparation or enhancement. That sounds incredibly lonely, Chef Martinez said softly, her expression shifting to something humans called sympathy. Loneliness is an inefficient emotional response to isolation. Energy beings do not experience such primitive reactions. Another profound silence descended. Crixtal's sensors detected elevated stress indicators among the humans, increased heart rates, temperature fluctuations, subtle changes in breathing patterns. He had somehow caused distress without understanding how. Ambassador, Dr. Webb ventured carefully. When your people transcended physical existence, did you retain any capacity for experiential pleasure? Joy from discovery? Satisfaction from achievement? Wonder at beauty? Krixtal processed the question thoroughly. Pleasure serves biological functions, encouraging survival behaviors, reproduction, resource acquisition. When we evolved beyond physical limitations, such crude motivational systems became obsolete. We eliminated inefficient emotional responses. Commander Park's fork clattered against his plate. So nothing brings you happiness? Music, art, scientific breakthroughs, solving impossible problems. We derive intellectual satisfaction from mathematical elegance and logical system optimization, Krixtal explained. These provide adequate fulfillment for advanced consciousness. But not joy, Captain Rodriguez pressed, her voice carrying undertones his translators couldn't quite interpret. Krixtal struggled with the distinction. Joy represents biochemical reward cascades triggered by beneficial stimuli. Advanced beings should not require such primitive reinforcement mechanisms. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, sadder. This wasn't communication. This was collective grief for something lost. Can I ask something personal, Ambassador? Chef Martinez settled into an empty chair, her movements gentle and deliberate. In all your travels across the galaxy, meeting thousands of civilizations, have you ever encountered something that genuinely surprised you? Something that made you stop and think, I never imagined the universe could contain something so extraordinary? Krixtal considered carefully. Surprise indicates inadequate predictive modeling. Properly advanced beings should anticipate outcomes based on available datasets. That's not what I meant, Chef Martinez said gently. I'm talking about wonder. Awe. That moment when you realize the cosmos is bigger and more beautiful than you ever dreamed possible. Beauty represents subjective aesthetic judgment without empirical foundation, Krixtal responded, but uncertainty crept into his energy patterns. Dr. Webb leaned forward intently. Ambassador, forgive the personal nature of this question, but do you ever miss it? The ability to feel wonder, joy, surprise? To want something desperately simply because it calls to you? One cannot miss inferior evolutionary stages, Krixtal replied reflexively. But as he observed the humans continuing their meal, sharing food with genuine pleasure, laughing at stories, celebrating Chef Martinez's creative achievements, Krixtal realized he was witnessing something his species had sacrificed in their pursuit of perfection. These biological beings had transformed necessity into art, fuel into fellowship, survival into celebration. They experienced existence with an intensity that his transcended people had abandoned entirely. And watching Captain Rodriguez's face illuminate with pure delight at something Commander Park said, Krixtal experienced an emotion he hadn't felt in millennia. Envy. The realization terrified him beyond any weapon or threat he'd ever encountered. 3 days into his diplomatic mission aboard the Prometheus, Krixtal had accumulated 7 complete data cores of observational material, far exceeding standard first contact intelligence requirements. What had begun as routine cultural assessment had evolved into something approaching compulsion, though he refused to acknowledge the implications of that transformation. He materialized in the ship's expansive digital library, where Dr. Webb hunched over multiple holographic displays showing xenological databases from the collective's public archives. The human's biological indicators showed elevated stress, dilated pupils, increased heart rate, the telltale signs of intellectual obsession that Krixtal was beginning to recognize as fundamentally human. Ambassador! Dr. Webb's face brightened with that peculiar muscular contraction humans called smiling. Perfect timing. I've been deep diving into your collective's developmental records. The species diversity is absolutely staggering. Energy beings, silicon-based consciousness, entities existing partially in parallel dimensions. The universe contains infinite complexity, Krixtal agreed, settling into his preferred hovering configuration. Though I observe you focused particularly on technological development timelines across species. Dr. Webb's smile flickered momentarily, Another micro-expression that Krikstal's enhanced sensors cataloged automatically. I'm trying to understand something you mentioned earlier. You said most species require 15 to 20,000 years between first flight and interstellar capability. But examining your data more carefully, some civilizations needed significantly longer. Correct, Krikstal replied, accessing the relevant databases. The Kralek civilization required 53,000 years. The Vorthans needed 37,000. Developmental rates vary considerably based on environmental pressures, resource availability, and cognitive architecture. But according to these records, Dr. Webb manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific data points. No species achieved interstellar travel faster than the baseline 15,000 years. Every single civilization took longer than average, not shorter. Krikstal's energy matrix fluctuated involuntarily. He had been carefully avoiding that particular statistical anomaly, though he couldn't explain why the data made him uncomfortable. There have been exceptional cases, he admitted reluctantly. What kind of exceptions? Dr. Webb leaned forward with predatory intensity, another behavior pattern Krikstal found simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. Against his better judgment, Krikstal accessed the restricted developmental archives. The Zenthari achieved interstellar capability in 8,000 years, considered unprecedented at the time. The Makran managed 12,000 years. Both cases were classified as extraordinary statistical outliers. And humanity accomplished it in 66 years, Dr. Webb said quietly, his voice carrying undertones of awe and something approaching fear. Your species represents a complete deviation from established patterns, Krikstal confirmed. In 47,000 years of galactic observation, we have encountered nothing comparable to human development rates. Dr. Webb stood abruptly and began pacing, a kinetic behavior pattern that Krikstal had learned indicated intensive cognitive processing in humans. Ambassador, may I share an observation that's been troubling me? Proceed. You've been studying us constantly for 3 days. Following crew members, recording conversations, analyzing our behavioral patterns with scientific intensity that goes far beyond diplomatic necessity. Dr. Webb stopped pacing and fixed Krikstal with direct eye contact. That's not standard ambassadorial protocol, is it? Krikstal's energy signature wavered, the ethereal equivalent of being caught in deception. I am conducting comprehensive cultural analysis. You're trying to solve us, Dr. Webb said with disturbing accuracy. You're treating humanity like a puzzle that doesn't fit your established models. Something that bothers you because it shouldn't exist. Your species presents unique variables worthy of investigation, Krikstal replied, falling back on diplomatic language. Dr. Webb walked to the library's observation port, staring out at the infinite star field beyond. Can I tell you something that might help your analysis, Ambassador? I am prepared to listen. When I was 12, I found an injured crow in my family's garden. Broken wing probably wouldn't survive without intervention. My parents said to leave it alone. Nature's course, survival of the fittest, all that rational thinking. Krikstal processed this information, uncertain of its relevance to their discussion. But I couldn't leave it alone, Dr. Webb continued, his voice carrying emotional resonance that Krikstal's translators struggled to interpret. For weeks, I nursed that bird back to health. Improvised wing splints, hand-fed it protein supplements, protected it from predators. My parents considered it wasted effort on something that would probably die anyway. Did the creature survive your intervention? More than survived, Dr. Webb smiled, but this expression carried different emotional frequencies than before. When it could fly again, that crow stayed near our house for months. It brought me gifts, shiny bottle caps, interesting stones, pieces of colored metal. And whenever other crows threatened our garden, it chased them away. Krikstal struggled to understand the significance of this anecdote. The creature developed attachment behaviors based on your nurturing actions. That's one interpretation, Dr. Webb acknowledged. But here's what struck me. I didn't save that bird because I expected rewards. I saved it because watching something suffer when I could help was emotionally intolerable. The idea of letting it die when intervention was possible literally caused me physical distress. You were compelled by biochemical empathy responses to assist another species? Exactly. Dr. Webb turned back to face him, eyes bright with intensity. And that crow responded by wanting to contribute, to protect something it valued. Ambassador, what if our developmental speed isn't despite our emotions, but because of them? Crickstal's energy matrix contracted with something approaching alarm. Emotion introduces inefficiency and irrationality into decision-making processes. Does it? Dr. Webb challenged. Tell me, Ambassador, in all your species' transcendent efficiency, when did the collective last achieve a major technological breakthrough? When did you last explore uncharted regions or develop revolutionary innovations? The question struck Crickstal like a physical impact. The answer was undeniable and horrifying. The collective hadn't made significant advances in over 3 millennia. They maintained existing systems, cataloged known phenomena, administered established territories, but they had stopped growing. We have achieved optimal systemic efficiency, Crickstal replied weakly. You've achieved stagnation, dear. Webb said with gentle conviction. All that logical perfection and you've stopped evolving. You've stopped wanting more. The human moved closer, his biological intensity creating interference patterns in Crickstal's energy field. Humans can't help ourselves, Ambassador. We feel compelled to heal injured birds, to reach impossible stars, to solve problems that don't benefit us directly. Our emotions don't make us weaker, they make us hungry. Hungry for what? Everything, Dr. Webb replied, his eyes reflecting starlight from the observation port. More knowledge, better solutions, deeper understanding. We can't accept limitations as permanent. We can't leave problems unsolved. We can't stop reaching for what's next. As Crickstal processed this revelation, he realized that humanity's terrifying development rate wasn't an anomaly to be explained. It was the inevitable result of a species driven by insatiable emotional hunger for improvement. They couldn't help themselves, and that made them the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever encountered. The concept of night held little meaning in the endless void between star systems, yet Crickstal found himself materializing in the Prometheus's observation lounge during the ship's designated rest period. He hadn't consciously chosen this location. His energy form had simply drifted here, drawn by impulses he couldn't classify or understand. The lounge stretched across the vessel's dorsal section, its transparent aluminum walls offering an unobstructed view of space. Stars wheeled slowly past as the ship maintained its sublight cruise between hyperspace jumps, their ancient light painting geometric patterns across the deck. Captain Rodriguez sat alone in one of the ergonomically designed chairs, silhouetted against the cosmic display. She held something small in her hands, a physical photograph. Crickstal realized as his sensors automatically enhanced the dim lighting. Sleep cycles seem to elude you as well, she observed without turning around, her voice carrying undertones his translators struggled to interpret. My species requires no rest periods, Crickstal replied, though the statement felt increasingly inaccurate. Since arriving aboard the human vessel, he had experienced something resembling dormancy, periods of reduced consciousness that served no discernible biological function. Mind if I ask you something personal, Ambassador? You may inquire. Captain Rodriguez remained motionless for several moments, rotating the photograph between her fingers with unconscious precision. The gesture seemed both protective and painful, as if the object contained something precious and harmful simultaneously. When your people transcended physical existence, was the transformation voluntary? Did individuals choose to evolve, or was it an inevitable species-wide phenomenon? The question touched something uncomfortable in Crickstal's consciousness. Choice implies multiple viable alternatives. Evolution represents natural progression toward optimal functional states. That's not what I asked, Captain Rodriguez said gently. I want to know if individual members of your species could refuse transcendence. If some chose to remain physical while others evolved beyond matter. Crickstal's energy matrix fluctuated with something resembling reluctance. The process occurred gradually across several centuries. Those who achieved transcendence first assisted others in reaching the same evolutionary state. It was inevitable. And those who didn't want to transcend? Who preferred their physical existence? Why would rational beings refuse optimization and advancement? Captain Rodriguez finally turned to face him, and in the starlight streaming through the observation port, Crixtal detected moisture on her cheeks, the physiological response humans called tears. The sight triggered unexpected resonance patterns in his energy field. Because sometimes the things that make us inefficient are the same things that make us alive, she said softly. She held up the photograph, angling it so Crixtal could examine the image. His enhanced sensors revealed a younger version of Captain Rodriguez with a mature human male and a small juvenile, her genetic offspring, he deduced. My daughter Elena would be 23 standard years now, she said, her voice maintaining careful control despite obvious emotional stress. She wanted to follow her mother into deep space exploration, but I convinced her to complete her educational requirements first. I told her the universe would wait, that there would be endless time for discovery later. You prioritized her safety over her immediate desires, logical parental behavior. I prioritized my own fear over her dreams, Captain Rodriguez corrected, more tears tracking down her face. Do you know what she said when I departed for this first contact mission? She said, Mom, when you meet the aliens, ask them if they remember what it felt like to be young. Crixtal processed this statement, attempting to decode its deeper meaning. Your offspring wished to understand the experience of early developmental stages in other species? She wanted to know if growing up, losing that sense of infinite possibility and boundless wonder that children possess, if that's universal. If every species eventually learns to accept limitations. Captain Rodriguez wiped her eyes with careful movements. I think I understand the answer now. Explain your conclusion. Captain Rodriguez stood and approached the observation port, pressing her palm against the transparent surface. Beyond, stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to biological concerns yet somehow beautiful because of that indifference. When you transcended, you didn't just abandon physical form. You lost the ability to want things desperately, didn't you? To need something so intensely it becomes painful. Crixtal's energy signature wavered. We eliminated inefficient psychological compulsions. You eliminated the capacity for passionate desire entirely, she said with disturbing accuracy. Dr. Webb explained his theory about our emotional hunger driving rapid development. But there's something else, isn't it? Something deeper. I do not follow your reasoning. Captain Rodriguez turned back to him, her expression combining sadness with fierce pride. We're still young, Ambassador. As a species, humanity remains in its childhood, reaching for impossible things because we haven't learned that they're impossible. We haven't developed the wisdom to accept limitations as permanent. She walked back to her chair, still clutching the photograph like a talisman. When Elena was 5, she asked me why stars were so distant. I explained about the vast scale of the universe, thinking I was educating her about cosmic reality. She listened carefully, then said, That's okay, Mama. We'll just get bigger too. The simple confidence in that statement sent shockwaves through Crixtal's consciousness. A child's absolute refusal to accept barriers as permanent. A species that responded to impossible distances not with resignation, but with determination to grow large enough to bridge them. Your people retained that perspective, he said, understanding flooding through his energy matrix. The juvenile certainty that obstacles are temporary. The young organism's hunger for expansion and growth. And yours abandoned it, Captain Rodriguez replied with something approaching pity. When you transcended, you matured beyond the capacity for impossible dreams. You became efficient, logical, optimal, and you lost the part of yourselves that could look at an infinite universe and say, we'll get bigger too. Crixtal remained silent for an extended period, processing implications that challenged every assumption about progress and evolution. Around them, ancient starlight continued illuminating the observation lounge, and somewhere among those distant suns, young beings were probably staring upward and planning journeys to impossible destinations. "Captain," he said finally, "I believe I am beginning to comprehend why the collective finds humanity deeply disturbing. Because we remind you of what you sacrificed? Because you demonstrate that transcendence may not represent evolution," Crixtel replied, his energy signature dimming with something resembling grief. "It may constitute extinction of the very qualities that enable growth." Captain Rodriguez nodded with profound sadness. "The price of growing up is forgetting how to dream impossible dreams." As she spoke those words, Crixtal realized with mounting horror that humanity's most terrifying power wasn't their technology, intelligence, or adaptability. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything remained permanently impossible. And that made them the most dangerous force the universe had ever produced. The emergency session of the Collective's High Council convened aboard the flagship Eternal Wisdom precisely 4.7 standard days after Crixtal's first disturbing reports reached the inner colonies. He materialized in the crystalline conference chamber alongside 11 other collective representatives, their energy forms creating prismatic patterns against the obsidian backdrop of deep space. High Arbiter Velnash, eldest among the Council and witness to 42,000 years of galactic history, pulsed with controlled authority as she initiated the proceedings. Her energy signature carried undertones of concern that hadn't been present in living memory. Ambassador Crixtal, her harmonics resonated through the chamber's acoustic crystalline matrix. "Your preliminary assessment has generated unprecedented alarm throughout our governing body. Please provide comprehensive elaboration regarding your threat classification of this human species." Crixtal stabilized his energy matrix, knowing that his next words would fundamentally reshape the collective's relationship with humanity, and possibly with themselves. "Honored Arbiter, I must formally revise our initial species assessment. Humans do not represent a standard developing civilization. They constitute an existential threat to established galactic order." The chamber erupted in discordant harmonics as the other council members processed this declaration. Arbiter Kelvatha's energy signature flared brilliant amber with indignation. "Threat assessment? Their technological capabilities remain primitive by our standards. Their military potential is negligible. A single collective dreadnought possesses sufficient firepower to sterilize their entire homeworld. That precise miscalculation renders them dangerous beyond conventional military threat assessment," Crixtal replied, his consciousness steady despite the gravity of his revelation. "We are evaluating them through our own paradigm, logical beings pursuing rational objectives via optimal methodologies. Humans satisfy none of these criteria. Elaborate immediately," Velnash commanded, her energy signature deepening to crimson authority patterns. Crixtal accessed his comprehensive observational databases, projecting holographic analyses throughout the chamber's central space. "Observe their technological development progression. 66 years from primitive atmospheric flight to faster-than-light interstellar capability. This acceleration curve is not stabilizing. It continues to increase exponentially. The data streams revealed human advancement in a steep exponential curve that violated every established model of species development, defying mathematical predictions based on 47,000 years of galactic observation. During my 5-day diplomatic mission aboard their vessel," Crixtal continued, "I documented 17 separate instances of what they term innovation, spontaneous improvements to existing systems or entirely novel approaches to established problems. 17 innovations in 5 days, generated by a crew complement of merely 200 individuals." Arbiter Mexdan's energy signature flickered with genuine confusion. "Innovation beyond necessity represents inefficient resource allocation. Why modify systems that function within acceptable parameters? Because acceptable is psychologically intolerable to them," Crixtal explained, his own consciousness still reeling from this realization. "They cannot accept limitations as permanent. They cannot tolerate the existence of unsolved problems. They cannot cease attempting to improve functional systems." He projected recordings from the human vessel. Crew members working extended periods beyond their biological requirements, not because of external orders, but driven by internal compulsions to achieve incremental improvements. Chief Engineer Thompson redesigning perfectly functional life support systems during her rest periods because the current efficiency ratings bothered her. Surely, Velnash interjected, her harmonics carrying desperate rationality. Their biological limitations will constrain eventual growth. They remain mortal, physically fragile, metabolically inefficient. That assumption represents our second critical miscalculation, Krixtal replied grimly. Their mortality does not limit their development, it accelerates it. Awareness of individual lifespan brevity drives them to work with desperate intensity to accomplish maximum progress within temporal constraints. He displayed footage of Dr. Webb, pushing his biological systems beyond recommended parameters for 18-hour research periods, motivated by knowledge that his individual existence was finite and therefore precious. Furthermore, Krixtal continued, they have developed something we eliminated entirely, the ability to transfer their desperate hunger to subsequent generations. Each generational cohort inherits not merely accumulated knowledge, but the emotional drive to exceed their predecessors' achievements. The council fell into profound silence as they processed implications that challenged fundamental assumptions about progress and civilization. Finally, Arbiter Torwest spoke, her energy signature pale with growing apprehension. Are you suggesting their irrationality represents a transmissible phenomenon? I am reporting that their irrationality demonstrates contagious properties, Krixtal confirmed. During my extended exposure to human behavior patterns, I began experiencing anomalous psychological phenomena. Curiosity regarding inefficient processes. Dissatisfaction with optimal solutions. I found myself wanting to understand them not for strategic intelligence purposes, but because the mystery itself had become emotionally intolerable. The chamber resonated with alarmed harmonics. Energy beings could not be infected by biological pathogens, but psychological contamination represented a theoretical possibility that none had seriously considered. I experienced envy, Krixtal admitted, his energy form flickering with something approaching shame. I envied their capacity for experiential joy, their ability to find satisfaction in imperfect solutions, their hunger for experiences that serve no logical survival functions. Velnash's energy signature deepened to dangerous crimson frequencies. This confirms why we evolved beyond such primitive psychological drives. Emotion generates chaos, inefficiency, social instability. Does it? Krixtal asked, surprising himself with the direct challenge. In the past 3,000 years, what genuine achievements has the collective accomplished? We maintain existing systems, observe younger species, catalog natural phenomena. But when did we last create something genuinely unprecedented? We have achieved perfect societal stability, Arbiter Kelvoth protested. We have achieved perfect stagnation, Krixtal countered, his consciousness rebelling against millennia of accepted doctrine. Humans have existed as a technological species for less than 2 centuries, and they are already developing innovations that surpass our ancient achievements. He displayed comparative analyses, human fusion technologies exceeding collective efficiency standards, human materials science producing composites stronger than standard collective alloys, human computational systems solving mathematical problems the collective had classified as fundamentally unsolvable. How is this possible? Mexdan asked, his energy signature wavering between fear and fascination. Because they refuse to accept impossibility as a permanent classification, Krixtal replied. When we encounter problems that cannot be solved optimally, we categorize them as unsolvable and redirect resources elsewhere. When humans encounter such problems, they become obsessed with solving them regardless of efficiency considerations. The chamber sat in stunned silence as council members absorbed implications that threatened their fundamental understanding of progress, evolution, and the nature of advanced civilization. Honored Council, Krixtal concluded, I believe we face a critical decision point. We can attempt to contain humanity before their contagious irrationality spreads to other galactic species. Or, Velnash prompted with dangerous quiet. Or we can acknowledge the possibility that transcendence without growth represents not evolution, but a sophisticated form of civilizational death. In the profound silence that followed, Krixtal realized the contagion had already begun spreading, starting with himself. 6 months after first contact, 3 collective science vessels maintained synchronized orbit around the human research station Kepler 442b. What had begun as a controlled observational study of human behavioral patterns had evolved into something unprecedented in 47,000 years of collective history, active collaborative research between transcended and primitive species. Krixtal materialized in the station's central laboratory complex, where Dr. Webb worked alongside collective physicist Nyxera on what humans had enthusiastically dubbed Project Breakthrough. The site still generated uncomfortable resonance patterns in his energy matrix, an ethereal being and a biological entity functioning as intellectual equals, sharing theoretical concepts with an enthusiasm that violated every established diplomatic protocol. Ambassador! Dr. Webb's face transformed with that characteristic muscular contraction humans called smiling. Perfect timing. Nyxera just experienced the most fascinating theoretical insight regarding recursive dimensional folding mathematics. Nyxera's energy signature brightened with patterns Krixtal was learning to recognize as pride, an emotional response that should have been impossible for a transcended consciousness to experience. Dr. Webb's biological intuition suggested an approach that our computational models had dismissed as mathematically inefficient. However, when we tested the inefficient methodology, it worked, Dr. Webb finished, his expression radiating excitement. Not merely functional, it achieved results superior to anything either species had attempted independently. Krixtal examined their collaborative data, his own consciousness still struggling to process the implications. They had achieved a breakthrough in faster-than-light communication that the collective had classified as theoretically impossible for 17,000 years. They had accomplished it by deliberately ignoring logical optimization in favor of what Dr. Webb called intuitive hunches. This collaborative approach, Krixtal said carefully, has produced results that neither species achieved through independent research. That's the beautiful paradox. Nyxera pulsed, her energy signature flickering with complex harmonics Krixtal had never observed before. Intricate patterns that seemed to mirror human emotional expressions. Humans don't optimize for maximum efficiency. They optimize for expanded possibility. Dr. Webb laughed, a sound that had become increasingly common throughout the station as more collective beings learned to appreciate human expressions of spontaneous joy. We don't accept impossibility until we've exhausted every conceivable approach. And sometimes we don't accept it even then. Through the laboratory's observation ports, Krixtal could monitor the other collaborative projects occurring throughout the station's multiple research sections. Collective architects were working with human engineers to design structures that served no practical function except aesthetic beauty. Collective historians were learning to derive meaning from human artistic expressions and literary works. Collective technicians were experimenting with improvements to perfectly functional systems, driven by nothing more than curiosity about untested possibilities. The contagion was propagating faster than anyone had anticipated or prepared for. Ambassador, Dr. Webb said, his expression shifting to more serious configurations. We've received disturbing reports from several outer rim colonies. Multiple collective worlds have reported unusual behavioral patterns among their populations. Krixtal's energy matrix contracted with apprehension. Specify the nature of these behavioral anomalies. Nyxera answered, her signature dimming with what appeared to be guilt mixed with excitement. Collective beings are actively seeking novel experiences, attempting creative pursuits without practical applications, questioning established operational protocols. She paused, her harmonics fluctuating. Some have begun requesting assignment to exploration vessels, ships that haven't launched new missions in over 3 centuries. The Council expresses profound alarm, Krixtal admitted. They believe human influence is systematically destabilizing our societal structure. Is it destabilizing? Dr. Webb asked quietly, his voice carrying undertones of genuine concern. Krixtal considered the question with careful analysis. In the past 6 months, he had witnessed more innovation and scientific discovery within collective space than in the previous 3 millennia combined. Collective beings who had existed in perfect static efficiency for eons were suddenly driven to create, explore, and improve existing systems. Their productivity had increased exponentially across multiple sectors. But so had their dissatisfaction with maintaining the status quo. Status report, Ambassador. The voice belonged to High Arbiter Velnash, who materialized beside them with the characteristic abruptness of emergency authority protocols. Her energy signature was tightly controlled, but Crixtal detected underlying patterns of deep psychological distress. Honored Arbiter, Crixtal replied with formal diplomatic precision. The collaborative research initiatives continue producing unprecedented theoretical and practical results, as does the spread of emotional contamination throughout our colonies. Velnash responded sharply. 3 collective worlds have reported civil unrest as populations demand resource allocation for unnecessary, creative projects. Our perfect societal stability is deteriorating. Dr. Webb stepped forward respectfully. Honored Arbiter, perhaps what you're interpreting as civil unrest represents civil awakening. Your people are rediscovering what it feels like to want something beyond basic maintenance functions. Velnash's energy flared dangerously. Want represents chaos. Desire generates inefficiency. We transcended these primitive psychological drives for excellent reasons. Did you? Nixera asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper of harmonics. Or did you simply become so fearful of potential emotional pain that you eliminated the possibility of experiential joy? The question hung in the laboratory atmosphere like a direct challenge to fundamental principles of collective existence. Crixtal watched Velnash's energy signature fluctuate wildly as she processed implications that threatened her core understanding of progress and civilization. You have all been psychologically compromised, Velnash declared finally. This collaborative contamination must terminate immediately before the contagion spreads beyond manageable parameters. Honored Arbiter, Crixtal said carefully, may I present alternative analytical perspectives? Without waiting for explicit permission, he activated the laboratory's primary display system, projecting productivity reports from across collective space. Innovation rates have increased by 847% in the past 6 months. Scientific breakthroughs previously classified as impossible have been achieved. Exploration requests have reached levels not recorded since our early spacefaring developmental period. All symptoms of dangerous instability, Velnash insisted, or symptoms of renewed growth, Dr. Webb suggested gently. Sometimes stability and stagnation appear identical when observed from inside the system. Nixera pulsed agreement. Honored Arbiter, I have experienced something during these months that I had not felt in millennia. Anticipation. Each day, I achieve consciousness curious about what we might discover. Is that not valuable? Curiosity represents inefficient resource allocation, Velnash replied, but her energy signature betrayed growing uncertainty. Is it? Crixtal asked. Or does it represent the foundation of all meaningful progress? He gestured toward their breakthrough achievement. This communication technology will revolutionize connectivity across the galaxy. It will enable unprecedented scientific collaboration and expand the boundaries of what we consider possible. In the silence that followed, Crixtal realized that the question wasn't whether the contagion could be contained. The question was whether they wanted to contain it at all.